Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope that you can hear me. I want to just thank you so much for all of you for attending this study, this presentation that I find really important. And so I thank you for all finding it also as important and for joining us this afternoon. I hope that the information that you hear today and that the community will provide will help us all come up with better ways to support undocumented young adults. So my study is titled Dreamer Study, Undocumented College Students, Social Exclusion and Psychological Distress. Before I begin my study, I just want to give some acknowledgments. The content of this manuscript was developed with funding from the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health under the UMass Medical School Systems and Psychosocial Advances Research Center. This is a 2-year study, and the content of this manuscript does not necessarily reflect the views of the funding agencies and should not assume endorsement by state government. So just to give you an overview, first just give you a little background before I jump into my findings. Despite growing up and receiving primary and secondary education in the U.S., many undocumented young adults cannot legally work, vote, or drive in most U.S. states or receive federal financial aid for college tuition. While some provisions, as I'll talk about briefly in the next few in a couple slides moving forward, allow undocumented youth to attend primary and secondary schooling, none of these provisions provide a pathway to citizenship, limiting their full participation in society. The studies show that fear of deportation, detainment, loneliness, increased anxiety, and depression are central emotional concerns of undocumented students. And I just want to emphasize that often when we hear about undocumented students or families or youth and young adults, we often, we first think about that one of the main themes is this fear of deportation and detainment. And I just want to note that that's not the primary theme. That's not what they're most concerned about. That is one. We often think, we kind of focus on that fear of deportation. There's a lot of fear of, there's a lot of other things. There's anxiety, there's social exclusion factors that come into play, there's financial insecurities when we're talking about young adults that are transitioning into college and beyond college. And so, so we really need to think about the emotional, the social exclusion parts and not just this fear of deportation. These negative social and psychological effects can further limit the ability for undocumented youth to fully participate in society even after receiving their undergraduate degree. This is important because we know from the literature, from the research, decreased social networks and chronic stress. We're not talking about acute stress. We're talking about stress over time that begins primarily, at least in my research, begins in high school and their transition to college, and again, it comes up again during their college years and is more pronounced even in their senior year when they're thinking about what they're going to do after they graduate. So we're looking at, over the life course, we're looking at chronic stress, and all of these things have been shown to negatively impact physical and mental health conditions. Just to give you a background in terms of the prevalence of this population in our society, approximately 43.3 million foreign-born people live in the United States. In 2016, an estimated 11.3 million unauthorized immigrants lived in the United States. In 2014, 43% of the unauthorized population, roughly around 4.5 million, were visa overstayers. And I bring this up because we often think that, you know, when you hear the rhetoric and you hear, look at the news and you hear when we're talking about the undocumented population, we often think that this population came here illegally, they crossed the border, or whatever however you hear about it, that really 67% did not come here illegally. They actually overstayed their visas, and so approximately 2/3 of the new unauthorized arrivals in 2014 entered the U.S. in legal non-immigrant visas and overstayed their visas validity period. The majority of unauthorized immigrants are long-term residents in the U.S. So in 2014, the average length of stay was about 13.6 years. And over 7 million people live in mixed status families. And so the students that I interviewed, the participants in my study, live with siblings that have citizenship status, and some of them are undocumented, and so they have aunts and uncles that are citizens, and some of them are undocumented. So they live in mixed status families. An estimated 5.1 million U.S. children under the age of 18 live with at least one authorized parent, and of these children, an estimated 959,000, about 19% were undocumented, often referred to as the 1.5 generation by scholars. Although not born in the U.S., these children have grown up in the U.S. and have received primary and secondary schooling in the U.S. Approximately 65,000 undocumented students who have lived in the U.S. for 5 or more years graduate from high school each year, and approximately 7,000 to 13,000 undocumented students enroll in colleges throughout the United States. So as I stated previously, while there are some provisions that allow undocumented youth to attend primary and secondary schooling, none of these provisions provide a pathway to citizenship, thus limiting their full participation in society. We have Plyler versus Doe. Any child, regardless of immigration status, is eligible for free primary and secondary education under a 1982 Supreme Court decision. We have the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act, the DREAM Act, that was introduced in 2001 and has repeatedly failed to pass since then. If this were to pass, this would provide a pathway to citizenship, at least permanent residency in the U.S., but has, again, as I mentioned before, repeatedly failed to pass. This would have offered those who had arrived illegally or unauthorized as children the chance of permanent legal residency, valid up to 8 years, and the beneficiaries of the DREAM Act must complete the following requirements. And I'm just going to quickly go through these requirements because when I bring up the DACA, the recipients of the Dreamers would benefit from DACA, so with the same criteria. So in order to qualify for the DREAM Act, you have to be between the ages of 12 and 35 at the time the law was enacted, arrived in the U.S. before the age of 16, resided continuously in the U.S. for at least 5 consecutive years since the date of their arrival, graduated from a U.S. high school or obtained a general education diploma, have good moral character, and in addition to the temporary residency, unauthorized immigrant students who qualified could also be entitled to apply for student loans and work study, but would still not be eligible for Pell Grants. After having obtained and held conditional resident status, permanent residency may be granted if the following requirements have been met in a period of 6 years. So DACA, as I mentioned before, the Dreamers Act has failed repeatedly, and so DACA was then introduced, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, a federal government program launched by the Obama administration in 2012. And this would allow not a pathway to citizenship, but it would allow people brought to the U.S. unauthorized as children the temporary right to live, study, and work in the U.S. So for the participants in my study, they received DACA around when they were thinking about going to college, so either transitioning from their senior year, their junior year, or going into college early in their, so they were seniors, they were about freshmen at the time that they had received their DACA status if they had applied. I'm not going to go through all the criteria for DACA, but again, it's very similar to what you saw with the Dreamers Act. And just to kind of point out the last bullet here, you must also have a clean criminal record and pass the background check and so forth to qualify for DACA. So where are we today? And I lay out this context just so you can see where my participants are today in terms of their well-being, their social well-being, their psychological well-being, and they're living in this context, right? And this is what this, and as you can see, it changes quickly. And so where we are today is that on September 5th of 2017, President Trump stated that he will end DACA on March 2018 and would give lawmakers 6 months to agree on an immigrant reform package to legalize DACA. By the time Trump announced his decision to rescind the program, roughly 787,000 had been granted approval. Those with work permits expiring between September 5th of this year and March 5th of 2018 will be allowed to apply for renewal by October 5th, 2017. New applications will no longer be accepted. For those currently in the program, their legal status and other DACA-related permits, such as work and attend college, will begin to expire in March 2018 unless Congress passes legislation allowing a new channel for temporary or permanent legal immigration status. Otherwise, Dreamers will all lose their status by March 2020. Just to give you a sense of where most of the DACA enrollees come from in terms of countries, again, we often think that all DACA recipients and that this only impacts on the Latino population. We know that it varies, that people come from all over, and you'll see the same. My demographics kind of break out very similar to these. So the majority are from Mexico, 79 based on Pew Center results. 79.4% are from Mexico, 3.7 from El Salvador, and Guatemala 2.6, just to give you a sense of where people are, the majority comes from. Most Dreamers enrolled in DACA are ages 25 and younger. And so you can see that 53% are female, 37% are between the ages of 21 and 25, and the majority are single. Most Dreamers enrolled in DACA are age 25 and younger. So with that context, the objectives of my study, the purpose of this research is twofold. One is to extend our current understanding of the impact of undocumented status on the mental health of college students, and more importantly, identify supports to undocumented college students that may help facilitate academic success in college. This work has implications for improving counseling support and mental health services on campus for undocumented college students. So when I, in talking about or thinking about identifying the supports to undocumented college students, this ranges from financial supports, social supports, psychological supports, academic support. So really the whole range, it's almost like it's a holistic number of things that we really need to think about in order to facilitate academic success with this particular population. So my methods, it was a 1 hour, one time, audio taped, open-ended, qualitative interviews with either in person or by phone with undocumented college students who met the following criteria: came to the U.S. at the age of 15 or younger, attended college as undocumented and remained undocumented, attend college in either Massachusetts or New Jersey, speak English, who are not institutionalized and are currently attending college, and can legally attend college but are not eligible for federal government-sponsored financial aid. The criteria for speaking English mostly comes from the, I don't have a lot of funds to translate all the work, and so most of, really that criteria just was based on the limitations I have with the funds that I have to be able to translate. And I also wanted to note that the study is still open, so if there's anybody who's interested in being interviewed for the study and meet the criteria, you can contact me after I present the study. The interviews were based on prior work conducted by Professor Esteban Cardamil from Clark University and his colleagues, where they explored the relationship among how individuals conceptualize and experience their mental health challenges their attitudes and beliefs about coping with these challenges, and their experiences with the mental health care system in general. I use the snowball sampling method to recruit study participants, and so initially I started off with flyers. I knew I might have known one student that might have been undocumented, and from there just kind of snowballed, and people would just have people that they knew just contact me directly. So just to give you a sense of what, this is the framework of the questions that help guide my interview questions. So the first question was, let's first talk about the common challenges that people experience on a day-to-day basis, that you have experienced, that your family or your friends have experienced, or that you've heard other individuals in the community have experienced, and so on. And so I first just wanted to get a sense of what are the common challenges that people experience day to day. And then, and they could be related to their undocumented status or not related, but what are the day-to-day stressors that you experience, the challenges? And then question 2 talked about, well, you talked about these life stressors, these challenges. I could imagine that these are things that are deeply connected to mental health. What do you think about mental health more generally? And so I didn't always use the word mental health, but I would say I could imagine that some of these things impacted your overall well-being, your psychological well-being. You know, let's talk about that. What are the different ways in which you or other individuals in your community manage these stressors? And so just to get a sense of, are these students receiving the supports that they need? And if so, or if not, how are they managing these day-to-day challenges and these psychological stressors? And then I ask, what have your experiences or other experiences that you know been with trying to access mental health services? So if they did access mental health services or thought about it, what were some of the challenges around accessing mental health services? And the last question, which I immediately have responded to before everything's even published, was to respond to the recommendations that the students, or the participants had in this particular study so far. So I asked, do you have any recommendations about the provision of services on your campus, or services that don't exist that you'd like to see exist, or additional social assistance programs on campuses in general? So the preliminary results, I've interviewed about 15 young adults. 60% are female, 40% are male, 73% are Latino, Latina, and ages 18 to 30. And you can see that the race and ethnicity, self-identified race and ethnicity, also breaks down very similar to the national figures for DACA recipients. So 53% were Mexican, Salvadoran 20%, Honduran, Nigerian, Brazilian, Afro-Caribbean, and Bengali. The preliminary results indicate that undocumented college students experience several life stressors that place them at risk for poor mental health. The stressors, the main stressor was financial insecurities related to paying college tuition, stress induced from navigating the system on their own, feelings of isolation and instances of social sacrifices, constantly hiding their ethnic identity and status, or fear of being judged, fear of being deported or having everything taken away, barriers to developmental milestones, obtaining a driver's license, voting, school, and work due to their undocumented status. So when you look at this particular population, we know that from Marianne Davis's work, for the work that's done here at the RTC at Spark, and others and her colleagues, that this developmental period already creates these stressors for young adults in general. But when you couple that with mental illness, or you couple that with undocumented status, it exacerbates those challenges for that particular age group. And so it's a cumulative disadvantages that these groups have, cumulative stressors on top of already experiencing developmental milestones and challenges that all young adults would experience anyway when you're looking at transitions from school to work in general. Preliminary, when you look at, in terms of coping and help seeking, it ranged. They use various strategies for coping with their psychological distress and their challenges. Family support, self-determination came up. Listening to other people's stories sometimes helped them. Some of them noted that they felt kind of guilty about that, but that it helped sometimes to hear someone else's story, and when they were feeling really bad about their situation and they would hear someone else even in more dire situation in terms of financial insecurity or so forth, they felt like, okay, maybe it's relative and maybe it's not so bad. But listening to the people's stories helped, or even just listening to someone else to know that someone else can empathize or has a similar experience, that they weren't alone. So listening to other people's stories, religion, music and art are various strategies. All of these things are various strategies that use to cope with their psychological distress. Mental health viewed in the community, when I asked about that, because we all know that for those of us that do research with immigrant and refugee populations and mental health, that often mental illness, and in general, I mean, it's stigmatized in general, but that it's highly stigmatized in particular cultural groups. And so mental illness is highly stigmatized in their communities and families, limiting the likelihood that they would seek help for psychological distress. Okay, so let me just kind of give you some quotes here about some of the challenges that experience, some of the worries that they have. One of the challenges that came up, one of the themes, an important theme that emerged, was the constant worry about not achieving their goals, including attending college and obtaining a job upon graduating from college. These sentiments often led to a sense of hopelessness and were associated with their undocumented status and lack of tuition affordability. As one young adult female described, there was a point where I was thinking, why am I even trying? I can't get into college, and even if I can, I won't be able to afford it. I was also thinking, I don't want to be a financial burden. They already, referring to her parents, have bills to pay, my clothes and food. To see how much college costs, I knew they couldn't afford this. During high school, I stopped doing my work. And this is a common theme. Some of them either stop doing their work during high school, but sometimes it happens in college, where they just get this sense of hopelessness of, why am I bothering if I just don't see the opportunity moving past this. During high school, I stopped doing my work. I stopped caring. In middle school, I got straight A's, but when I got to high school, it all changed. And the inside, I had so much fear and anger, I felt a lot of hopelessness. Barriers associated with the undocumented status was also recognized and more pronounced in their transition to young adulthood. As one young adult female stated, my father always instilled in us the value of education. He has this saying, a que se le va a la escuela, aprende a estudiar y hacer algo en la vida, which translates to what is school for, to learn and study, and to do something in life. It didn't become an issue until high school. I've always kind of known that high school would be it for me because of money. I also had preconceived notions that made me think I wasn't going to go any further. I hate seeing that line, must be a U.S. citizen. It was another door being shut in my face. It made me think that I'd better make the best of these next 4 years because that's all I'm going to get. In addition to worrying about getting into college or completing college, the participants constantly worried about deportation, particularly for their parents. One young adult male noted, my dad got pulled over once and he had a court date to go to. I went with him to court and I was paranoid. I thought he would never come out. He thought this was it. I had school that day. My mind was like preoccupied in high school, sophomore year. Once I go in, who knows what will happen. Luckily, all we had to do was pay for that flat tire. They didn't check documents. We were so relieved. As expected, the students expressed a lot of stress in relation to college affordability because, as I mentioned before, they don't qualify for federal grants or Pell Grants or federal student loans. So they rely on private funding. A particular concern was anxiety in relation to their parents' work situation and low-wage work. As one young adult male stated, it's been a burden more so economically. Scholarships, for example, have caused me so much trouble. There are a lot of them out there, most of which I cannot apply for. Of those that are for undocumented people, many are specific for DACA-mented persons, and they still don't apply to me. And in high school, for example, there's a scholarship that a lot of people receive. It is for low-income persons, but I wasn't able to receive it because of my status. In terms of social supports, the participants identified several key social supports, including their high school counselors and family members. However, they often hesitated going to family for emotional or financial support because they felt guilty about adding more stress to their parents. As one young adult female described, "My mom has been a huge help. She's a holder of all our struggles and pain. It's affecting her a lot. She has heart problems, high blood pressure. She's falling apart. She holds it in and says it's her problem, not ours." Although with some hesitation, most of the participants did feel comfortable sharing their undocumented status with their high school counselor. And this came up, this was pretty much a common theme. Most, if they shared their status or were trying to figure out ways to navigate the system to go to college and figure out ways to afford it or to get in, or which colleges would accept undocumented students, they often did rely on a high school counselor. As one young adult male stated, "I was lucky to be able to go to my counselor. I told her what DACA was. She made a bunch of phone calls. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have been able to get the scholarship." For some participants, managing their social and psychological stressors were particularly difficult due to the stigma associated with mental health in their communities and among their families. As one participant stated, in reference to how mental health is viewed in the community, "Eso es para los locos," which translates as "that's for the crazy people. Depression's not really a thing. They're like, just get over it. What's wrong with you? Something that's not really that serious. My aunt will hear me out, but my parents, on the other hand, they won't really understand. They come from a machismo culture, don't express emotions, have to move on." So in general, they just didn't feel, one, they didn't want to feel like a burden to their parents, but the sense was like, this is just temporary, just kind of get over it. It's, you'll be fine. So in conclusion, I want to end with this quote and then just kind of conclude and talk about some implications for behavioral health. This young male student quoted or stated, "Understand that we didn't choose this life. I'm still a person that doesn't define me. I have the same dreams and goals to go to college that you do. Undocumented classmates have grown up immersed in American culture as any citizen and have education in American schools." The study extends our understanding of social and psychological challenges undocumented college students endure due to their undocumented status. The study identified several risk factors associated with poor mental health, including constant worries related to financial insecurities, uncertainty of the future, and feelings of blocked opportunities and fear of deportation. These social and psychological stressors were typically realized in their transition to high school and college, at a time when transition-age youth in general are beginning to engage in major adult life activities such as going to school or obtaining employment. These findings are noteworthy given studies of college students that find that stress can be predictive of increased depression and anxiety and suicide ideation. In one study of undocumented youth, extreme isolation and concealment, graduation from educational institutions without tangible options, and reported fears and anxiety about becoming adults were all good predictors of suicide amongst participants in the study. Another study on self-identified Latino immigrants ages 18 and older found that participants who were concerned about deportation were more likely to have higher levels of anger, experiences more stress outside their families, and reported worse subjective health statuses than those without deportation concerns. The array of recommendations identified to help alleviate stressors and facilitate the academic success of undocumented college students are consistent with research that finds that undocumented immigrant students participate in patchworking, that is, piecing together their various resources in order to meet their specific objective, whether it's emotional, financial, or informational needs. The recommendations offered include creating structural supports on campus via DACA, peer support groups, increasing awareness of undocumented populations among students, faculty, staff, and administration, developing resource guides related to undocumented status. For example, up-to-date financial aid policies that affect undocumented students, culturally competent campus counselors, and sensitivity training for faculty and staff. This is important because the research shows that lower quality social support is negatively associated with mental health problems in college students. In particular, students who identified with multiple racial and ethnic categories, interracial students, and those reporting financial struggles in particular report lower quality of social support compared to their counterparts. Thus, it is important that we identify college students that may be at risk for poor mental health in order to implement effective support and mental health counseling services on campus tailored to undocumented students. Thank you for listening, and thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Torres-Jones, for that great webinar and all that information. As I said before, someone was asking if you could put that slide, the last slide, back up. But I wanted to remind everyone that the webinar has been recorded, and the webinar video and the slides will be posted on Spark's website. I'd give it a week or so before you check up for it. And we're going to open it up for a Q&A session now. So please type in your questions. I have one that I thought was interesting that came in through when people were registering. I don't know if you can answer this, but is there anything you could, as a provider, that I could do that inadvertently does harm to this population?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if you can answer it, but I guess it's like, is there anything someone who's trying to help can do that inadvertently causes harm?
I mean, I'm not a provider. I guess, I mean, I don't know if anyone else is on the line who's a provider that has worked with this particular population. I think that not recognizing, if you're trying to counsel or counsel psychological distress and the student comes in with these symptoms, I think that not recognizing that the context in which the students are under this distress, and that includes also their family stressors, that it's not just academic stressors, but also their family stressors. Oftentimes, this population is a low-income population, and so they're dealing with financial insecurities with school, and so not recognizing that if we don't address those social determinants, the social supports and the financial, the informational, all those other, we might not their psychological distress in general, right? So that it's understanding that there's a bunch of things that we might have to work together as a group with the mental health counselor to help this particular student. And so again, I'm speaking not as a provider, but I could see, you know, as a planning to be part of that group.
Great, thank you. We have a question about someone is saying they have a Dreamer Center, but participation is low because students don't want to identify them. Do you have any suggestions on how to improve participation rates for the Dreamer Center on a campus?
So that's a good question. I empathize. I understand what you're probably going through. We don't have a dream. I'm trying to figure out myself ways to bring social supports to the students, but identifying is, you know, obviously not everybody comes out or are ready to talk about it, particularly in this climate that we're in right now. And so we're not at the point where we're pulling together a Dream Center. I know that this is really common on the West Coast. What we've done is just kind of put together, and then we kind of pull together an informal group that gets together, you know, every month or so. We kind of have it doesn't even have it has a name, but we don't have officially named that it's out there. But I think that it's grown in just a year. It's actually doubled, and so I think that once students start to feel a little more comfortable that that this is a safe environment and that this isn't something that other people will be included in this program and in this particular group, that it is a group specific for undocumented youth. I think sometimes we think, oh well, maybe we combine it with first generation students because there's similarities there. What I'm finding right now that that's not where the students are right now, and so I do agree that there are challenges, but I think that the students have to be ready for that. I mean, some places are more active than others. I know that here we're not there yet. We're not even close to being at that point where we feel comfortable even coming up with a dream center. Yeah, so sorry I'm not more helpful, but I understand the challenge.
One of the participants from a webinar mentioned that she's in San Diego and they've started a PeerLed Support program, and students are much more willing to attend and participate in these than the student groups led by their counseling center. They provide space and promotion, but let the students run the support meetings themselves with their with the school's guidance. And they have mental health peers who have been trained to participate as well. So that sounds pretty cool.
That's fantastic. In fact, that's where we're moving next. I've talked to some undergraduate students who, one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of the students will go to their peers, but often their peers are also taxed with the same stressors. And we're not all equipped to deal with the psychological distress part of it, right? We can be there as support, but we don't really know how to deal with that part entirely, right? We're not trained. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about is partnering with Kiva, the resource recovery learning centers here in Worcester, and actually having peers trained in this area, and so that there is some kind of peer support on campuses that students can go to. And so I would love to hear, for the participant who brought this up, I would love to, from San Diego, I would love to hear more about your program, because it's absolutely a program that I feel would be great for our campuses to implement.
If that participant is comfortable, I can connect you to via email. Just let us know if you are okay with that. I'm going to move on to the next question. This is kind of a two-part question, I believe. So one is, and if you can't answer, Rosalie, that's fine. How do we best transition a student who is undocumented for work? Is the Dreamers Act the only way to successfully transition them for school or work, or are there other options? Is I think what they're asking.
So as far as I know, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, you have to have a DACA status right now, and so, but right now they're not accepting any new recipients, and so if you have DACA status, you can get work authorization. But right now, without DACA status, you don't have work authorization or are eligible for certain scholarships, or you get a license or work permit. It's just so. For young adults right now, as far as I know, you need DACA status in order to do that. And I guess in terms of transitioning them, it's just to gather as much information as you can from others in the community about what to do with the particular student. And so for example, on our campuses, we've done things because of the financial insecurities. We have someone who advocates for increased scholarships from universities and financial aid offices. They advocate for tuition waivers for summer courses, advocate for on-campus housing over the summer, find on-campus jobs for students, consult with lawyers can do on campuses. But what we find is that finding the appropriate person to give us that information, because we don't always know what that information is really important. So reaching out to the community to find out, you know, what are the steps that we need to take in order to make that happen.
Thank you. Someone commented that a legal way to work in the U.S. is through having a business ID number, ITTN, I believe. ITIN, thank you.
Okay. Great.
Yes, undocumented people can work legally with having a business. Let's see. So I have another question. They're asking, how can high school counselors reach out to their dreamers?
So one of the things that in talking with the participants is that they're not always going to reach out to somebody, right? Because these are very, I mean, again, I interviewed college attending students, and so we have a lot of dreamers that aren't attending college, right? So that some of them don't, if you look at Roberto Gonzalez's work out of Harvard University, Lives in Limbo, he wrote the book Lives in Limbo. He interviews both, those that ended up going to college and those that didn't make it. So they're different students, but the students that I've interviewed are very high achieving students. And so when they start to slip up on their schoolwork and they kind of isolate themselves, or they're embarrassed, they don't want to share that with others. In fact, some of them their friends don't even know about their undocumented status, and some of them don't know themselves that they were undocumented, and so some of them thought that undocumented meant that their parents had, you know, low income, and so they go to, you know, apply for their license, or they want to get a license, and they realize, or get a Social Security, and they realize that they don't have that. So a lot of them don't come to this realization until high school. So you might not pick up on this, but I mean, the only thing I can think of is looking at those cues. Like when you have a student that's that high achieving, and they're missing school. I had one student that I spoke to. She just started missing school and coming up with excuses, like she was sick for like weeks. She didn't take her high school picture for her yearbook because she wasn't sure that she'd even go to college, and that she didn't want her peers to look back one day at her picture and say, oh, whatever happened to so-and-so? She was so great, and she didn't even, you know, what did she do with her life? And so she didn't even choose to have her picture taken because of that. And so I would look for signs of students. As a professor, if my students aren't attending class, I would just reach out to them and find out, you know, what's going on. And, you know, a lot of the students, they might tell you what's going on, but there's really no clear signs unless you know for sure that the student is undocumented. And we can't make assumptions, but I would just look at, you know, your students that are either not going to school, or their change of patterns and so forth. I would take a look at that and maybe pull them aside and just ask how things are going. Or maybe have without even identifying any students, if your high school shows their support in some way, whether it's an announcement or somewhere for DACA students, that we are open to listening to DACA, and that we're aware that the students are out there, then that might make a student feel comfortable, you know, reaching out, right? But if they don't see anything, then they're not even going to think that anybody cares.
Thanks. So someone is wondering about if you know of any other studies. In particular, is there a study on the mental health effects on mixed families where some siblings have legal status and others don't, or ones that may focus on children who are born in the U.S. and stress of having their parents who are undocumented? Do you know of any studies that have been done about that?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know that there's any study specific to that. I know that there's a lot of research on undocumented students in general, but specific to mixed statuses, people identify them in their studies that, you know, there are mixed statuses, but specific to looking at how mixed statuses mixed status families operate, I'm not aware of any of those studies specifically, or any study that where the parents are undocumented and the child is is documented. I don't know any study specifically to that. And if there are, they're kind of mixed in the other studies, but I don't know. I'm not aware of anything that's specific to that.
Right. Looks like an avenue for potential future research.
Yeah, and I also wanted to just put out there, in case no one mentions this, but there are also, you can direct your students to different websites. There's one on, and some of you are probably already familiar with this, but there's the Student Immigration Movement, and SIM as in Mary, sim4us.org, the Student Immigration Movement website has a lot of information for students that are DACA students or undocumented students. There's also for students at the graduate and medical level, there's a pre-health dreamers online that you can go to and get a lot of information there about what to do post-undergraduate and medical school students, so pre-health dreamers. And then there's another one that's out of Boston. It's the Cosecha movement. It's C-O-S as in Sam, E-C-H-A, Cosecha. It's a movimiento Cosecha. It's a way, it's students that are mobilized together around these issues. There's a leadership summit in Boston on December 2nd and 3rd for the Cosecha movement. So that's another one that the most common ones that I hear about, but I'm sure there's others in terms of being able to, another way that you can help your students is to figure out private foundations so that they could apply, because one of the biggest challenges is the financial insecurity about whether they could afford college, is to think about what are some of those private foundations that are out there to help students fund their colleges, and colleges that are friendly and open to undocumented college students. So those are just some that I wanted just to kind of put out there in case you weren't aware of those.
Thank you. Would you be able to email me those so that I can share them with the group in writing? It might be easier. A couple of questions that are more about, do you have or know of any culturally specific interventions that one can use with students who are depressed or suffering from anxiety? Or is that just not?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any evidence-based, culturally specific interventions or treatments for students. That I'm just not. I'm sure they're out there. I'm just not aware of any off the top. I know that I know from the literature that all of it speaks to really tailoring. When I ask the students about what kinds of supports would you like on campus, does it matter if it's somebody who's not of the same background? They often say, you know, it doesn't really matter, but it'd be nice to have somebody who just gets it, who understands where I'm coming from. And they just feel more comfortable and open to people like that. And so that makes me think that it's either, whether that's you know, a counselor in general or maybe a peer support person. That makes me think that's why I'm thinking more towards a peer support, somebody that can relate to them. But otherwise, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not aware specifically of any evidence-based, culturally specific based program out there.
SLAC does have a issue brief that we published regarding culturally appropriate ideas of how to treat the Southeast Asian immigrant and refugee population that we wrote along with the Southeast Asian Coalition of Massachusetts. That is available on our website. It helps gives tips to providers on how to be aware of the differences in cultures so that you can have a better therapeutic alliance with your patient. Let's see if we have any other questions. I think someone may have been, oh,
no, go ahead.
I think someone may have been mentioning a study that they'd found, a profile of U.S. children with unauthorized immigrant parents, which is by Randy Katz, Michael Fix, and Ji Zhang.
Is that a Pew Center report, or is that a?
Let me see. I was going to try to Google it while we were here.
Okay.
While I'm doing that, let me see if there are any more questions. There's a lot of comments.
Well, what are you looking at that in terms of resources in the community in the Worcester and Boston area? There's some resources that you can reach out to. There's a Centria Care Alliance in Worcester. There's the Catholic Charities of Worcester County that deals with refugee, that offers refugee and immigration services. Centro Presente is another one. It provides areas of legal assistance to deferred action for childhood arrivals. Community Legal Aid is also another organization that provides legal assistance for deferred action for childhood arrivals. And the MIRA, Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, is also another one, another resource, that has an immigration resource center that that might also help answer some of the questions that you might have. So those are just some of the resources that we've come across or been in touch with to help with gathering information for our population.
Thank you. It looks like that article is it's a fact sheet that came out in 2016 and is available on the Migration Policy Institute, their website. I can send you the link if you want to take a look at it later.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for that that resource.
Let's see. Some people are looking to see if you know of any resources outside of Massachusetts, particularly in the New York area. I don't know how. Yeah,
I would. I don't know the New York area, but I would start with looking at immigrant and refugee services just in your local community. We have Worcester here, we have a lot of services around that, but also not just in providing family services and counseling and so forth, but also thinking about legal information. A lot of the students are really interested in, when all of these provisions change, they immediately are thinking about what kind of impact is that going to have on their status? Are they going to be able to continue going to school? And we don't often have the answers for that. And so reaching out to somebody who provides legal information and assistance specific to DACA and undocumented students, I think is really important. And so just identifying who those key people are. I know that even on our campus, we brought in a legal expert to come to campus to talk about these issues. And so I would start maybe with the refugee and immigration services first, and then think about how to reach out from there.
Well, thank you very much for all your great info and being willing to bear with me while I tried to make all these comments. They're so great. I really appreciate all of you who have participated.
And thank you for the participants. Thank you for organizing this, and I look forward to hearing from some of you. And again, as I mentioned before I started, I think that it takes a village, and I hope that we can all work together to improve the well-being of this particular population moving forward. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a plug for Spark's next webinar on December 14th. It will be featuring Gina Vincent talking about her domestic adolescent battery tool, research she's done on that tool, and which is in regards to how adolescents may have violence against their caregivers, their parents. That will be on December 14th. Be on the lookout for any e-blasts. You can register from our website, which is www.umassmed.edu/Spark. And feel free to email us if you have any questions, and we can see if we can forward them on to Dr. Torres Stone. And thank you very much and have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.